Перепрошую за затримку.
Sorry for the delay. The civil service reform was still heading us. Now, colleagues, we have a nonetheless important and interesting roundtable discussion that concerns much more than one generation. We will be speaking about the pension reform in the context of fiscal reform unfolding in Ukraine. And this will be the thing to be perceived by many generations. I'd like to give the floor to Halyna Tretyakova. She will be the moderator of this event. And I truly hope that we will come up with some constructive conclusions that we will hope will be heard by those in charge of pension reform. Good afternoon. We'd like to address all strata of the population, both retired persons, those approaching this age, as well as to younger generations who still harbor some hopes of more decent retirement life. The RPR section that deals with pension reform focuses not just on retired persons, but also on those who are still to find and select the retirement benefit schemes. The key question is how to finally make people live decent, financially decent life in advanced age. I'd like to show you some figures. They're organized in a way of graphs, just to show you some key basic facts. We still have dominating public retirement benefit scheme. We still have just early offshoots of private schemes. But if we take all the public finances, and this about 700 billion hryvnias, the amounts we'll be talking about, I mean the pension money, will be about 250 billion. That is roughly 1/3 of it. And in proportion to the 500 billion in the national budget, we'll see that the retirement benefits make for an aggregate half of the budget. And this also makes 16 to 18% of GDP, probably the highest factor worldwide. And with such blank figures, we could be perceived as the country of happy pensioner goers, but this is not the case in reality, and it is necessary to, I think, for the people to think about their own private ways of scrambling money for retirement whenever the state is unable to provide them with. And we need to introduce certain changes to the fiscal code to find better mechanisms of retirement benefit provision. I'd like to give the floor now to Svitlana Zhukova, one of the authors of changes to the tax code of Ukraine that we are about to present today. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'd like to present you with proposals elaborated by the pension fund group of the RPR on ways of optimizing the third level of pension reform. These have been construed as a draft bill to change the fiscal code of Ukraine for the purpose of providing incentives for employers and employees to use the third level of retirement benefit system through implementation of additional organization and economic incentives for concerned citizens. The bill also includes a relevant set of documents, package consisting of the explanatory notes with a statement of the current situation and tasks and objectives to be met, and the comparative table. So what we suggest to introduce the third level of retirement benefit, we need to make the mechanism of taxation of retirement benefit to put it in line with existing solidarity level. Specifically, for the third level, that taxation should concern the amount of retirement benefit in excess of 3 minimum wage amounts. The proposal I am going to introduce you is about setting up equality principles, the principles of equal treatment and of solidarity treatment for the third level. We introduce tax benefits for individuals on a contractual based retirement benefit schemes. And we want to provide certain reductions of tax burden whenever the amount, the contribution is paid by the employer himself. And we'd like to increase this threshold to 5 times the minimum wage. We also suggest introducing 3 mechanisms of receiving tax benefits in this regard. First of all, it will about the possibility for an employee to obtain the amounts of tax discount in cash from his employer. So this will get rid of the need for people to go to fiscal authorities requesting such refunds, and the need to provide additional declarations and income statements. And this will provide better accounting and reporting conditions for employers. We want employers to have optimization of labor costs so that optimized extra funds could be used to pay contributions to pension schemes. As regards tax rebates, we suggest providing the right for individuals to get rebates in non-governmental pension schemes, and we'd like to add it to the range of other tax benefits or rebates under the law, and this should be an unconditional right. The expert community today says that third level of pension scheme will not be possible without changes in the management of common social contribution. And because of that, we suggest making changes to the closing provisions of the law on collection and administration of the single social contribution, and a reducing coefficient to be introduced. In our terms and conditions for reducing coefficient implementation, we want certain provisions to be included that concern the payment by employers of pension deductions for the benefit of their employees based on the implementation of such changes, as well as based on implementation of additional economic incentives to stimulate people to better use private non-governmental pension scheme. This will also lead to better payment condition and better jobs offered. We would like to see these changes introduced since the next coming calendar year. Am I right to understand that if a person will make disbursements to private pension scheme, he will receive certain tax rebate on the amount contributed that way? Yes, this is correct. And you also suggest a considerable increase of that tax rebate. It will be it is based on minimum wage indicator, and we suggest that this amount should be equal to 5 times the minimum wage, which is roughly a bit more than 5,000 hryvnias. That is to say that if a person is contributing on a monthly basis amounts of more than 5,000 hryvnias for upcoming retirement, he will receive tax rebate for that amount. So if this amount is possible for someone to do, then it will provide individuals with possibility of getting private pension security on top of the mandatory pension scheme suggested by the state. You've also mentioned the fact that related fiscal declarations and income statements will have to be filed by employers rather than employees, thus alleviating the burden for employees. Yes, definitely. It will be a nice chance for employers to automatically file in relevant reporting documents to show amounts designated as retirement contributions. Super. This means that individuals, private individuals, will have reduced burden with papers. And then you also mentioned some benefits for employers themselves whenever they will be introducing such non-governmental pension benefit schemes. Yes, if there will be employers' contributions at place, it should be pre-agreed with employee, by the way, but it will be possible. It will be possible to have certain rebates for employers as well. Okay, then we may assume that due time we will be richer than we are now. But can we imagine a society when we are richer and we do no longer depend on the pension fund of Ukraine? I'd like to give the floor now to Mariana Onufrik, a manager of an expert group on pension reform from the RPR, and they're about to introduce changes not just to the third level of pension reform, but also to the first and the second one, but still we're focusing on the third one today, speaking of how we can save for the retirement ourselves.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I would like to say a couple of words about the background of this story, how this changes to the pension reform appeared. Our group has been working for 18 months almost. Our working group comprises practitioners in this field, experts, academics, and we look at the pension provision issue in Ukraine and try to do this comprehensively. These materials, these handouts which I have here, they reflect the entire picture which we have which we suggest for pension provision in Ukraine, which provides for first, second, and even for the third level of the pension reform, which might allow people to get their saved money as pension provision. Our working group worked with the Ministry of Social Policy. The product of our work, the draft law number 2767, is already registered in the Verkhovna Rada. This law may change the life of the millions of Ukrainians, not just of the pensioners, which amount to 12 million in Ukraine, but the lives of many other citizens. The law has got positive assessment from the government, from civil activists, from NGOs. The introduction of the second pension level is a benchmark for the International Monetary Fund. Non-reforming of the pension provisions and non-introduction of the second level may become the reason for cutting down financial assistance to Ukraine. Unfortunately, this draft law is just registered without further scrutiny of it. As of now, it has not received any support from members of parliament. Nevertheless, we hope that the parliament and other governmental stakeholders will finally hear the international experts who say that reform of social provision in Ukraine is inevitable and requires and involves social reform and economic reform in Ukraine, because everybody understands that pension reform stays at the crossroad between social and economic reforms. Today we are discussing the third level of pension reform, which means that despite all the difficulties in society, the third, and despite imperfect legislation, the third level of pension reform has been working quite perfectly in Ukraine, and now we try to stimulate participation in the third level of pension provisions via tax code. This would allow to strengthen the welfare of Ukrainian people, and the growth of welfare of each people would mean the growing welfare of the entire country. The pension savings may become a long-term resource which might influence positively Ukrainian economy. Mariana, you mentioned that it should become a priority for the state. Whether there is any branch of power which sets the pension reform as the top priority for itself. Currently, we heard about the top priorities for the presidential administration, or there are some members of parliament who believe that although this is a difficult topic, but we should start it. The leader of this reform is Minister of Social Policy Pavlo Rozenko. He initiated the draft law 2667. The President's address to Verkhovna Rada, the President's address on the State of Nation contained this reference. The National Council of Reforms also comprises the group on financial reform, which includes some elements of pension reforms in terms of savings accumulation. Unfortunately, in Verkhovna Rada today, which is the exclusive body which is able to launch this reform, unfortunately we have to state that in Verkhovna Rada there is a specific unwillingness to push up this reform and to ensure development for this third level. Although many times we tried to prove that this reform is inevitable. So you should step in and either the Cabinet of Ministers, the presidential administration, or members of parliament should bring this draft law to the parliament, unless our state is unable to protect us. We believe that there might be the advanced members of parliament who can become pusher of this draft law, or there might be prime minister who might become a pusher of this reform. If somebody has questions and requires explanations, we would be happy to answer all possible questions. I'm happy to introduce to you Vladislav Cherkashin, an expert of RPR who professionally works on the tax code. The working group of RPR dealing with the tax code is aware that we should decrease general fiscal burden for employees and employers. Also, we have a huge mandatory social payments, and the absolute majority of this money go to the pension fund. So Vyacheslav Cherkashin works on the reform of the mandatory single social payment. When our colleagues from the pension reform group invited us to participate in their work, and we have studied this draft law, we realized that this is the draft law of a big importance. The non-public sector is the non-dear child of the pension system. And of course, we witnessed how the reforms of 2011-2013 failed. Also, the government sacrificed a lot, having added the taxation of pensions. The government has no trust to the third level, weak joint stock market. So all these problems hinder development of the third pension reform level. The third level of pension provision is not very much popular, although dynamics is positive. As for the fiscal aspects of the third level, and why we believe this draft law should be supported. The draft law removes the elements of the tax discrimination. There are two systems of taxation, pension taxation, pay-as-you-go system, and the third level. That's why we should try to bring both ways of pension accumulations to parity. The next important aspect is strong accumulative pension system is a good factor for investments in the economy. I think that one more aspect is important against a background of middle class, which is working today. In the future, we will be able to get a strong middle-class pensioners in the future, which will strengthen democracy and allow us to overcome the stereotypes from the Soviet times that this is only the government or the state which is responsible for everything. And while the private sector is stronger than the governmental, could be stronger than the governmental sector, and there is less corruption in it. That's why we will support this project. Thank you, Vyacheslav. You added some new arguments to our discussion, that is about removal of discrimination.
It will about retirement benefits being provided only by the state and whenever done via private institutions. The taxation systems in place made it not feasible. The state system that includes this common social contribution had relevant retirement benefits not included into the aggregate income of individuals. And surely that created disparity of conditions that effectively did not provide for proper involvement of private institutions in this retirement benefits sector. And we still very much focus on the state-owned system. Surely the solidarity system, given it is a mandatory one, will enjoy some more fiscal privileges, fiscal benefits for quite some time. And as the authors of the bill want to introduce some tax incentives, it's really a positive development, but I think strong doubts can be perceived as to whether it will be supported by governmental institutions, because no fiscal benefits are possible in the time of economic crisis. But can we speak about really privileges or benefits? I can assure you that most probably we will see it being tagged as a benefit that will not be popular with the government. You also mentioned the low so-called financial literacy among the Ukrainian. Here's a question to you. What is your appreciation of your own financial literacy level? And check for people outside who actively buy foreign currency, dollars, euro, knows to save their money from inflation. It's a kind of currency hedging. And our housewives can easily gather in front of the National Bank to demand some rights. At times they even receive something from these actions. And we can see lots of households nicely dealing with official salaries, with black salaries paid in envelopes, and people seem to be prodigiously capable of surviving any crisis situations. You know, I myself do not consider myself a financially literate person. I know too much probably about taxes to deem myself a financially literate one. But I would rather refer to an OSCE study that confirmed the lack of knowledge among the residents in terms of their financial and economic rights and how to protect them, because a strike is not always the legal and the most efficient way of fighting for one's rights. Surely the huge savings people have stashed at their homes, when they count in hundreds of billions, say that people really can manage many things. Thank you. You mentioned a very interesting topic of human rights, and there is a nice human right, one of them, called ownership, the right of ownership and ownership protection. And we do demand from the state to create some condition for our existence in the system, to have some steady rules that would protect our property, whether it is deposits with banks or our investments into our private property, real estate, or whatever else. And there is a group, by the way, within the RPR that deals with financial sector reform. And whenever we speak about launching incentives for third-level pension reform, we hear from this group in the RPR about the need to have protection of ownership rights in order to build trust among the people, trust in the government. So the question of how non-governmental pension funds operate and how to get rid of those gray schemes used by some pension funds like Arcada Bank and a couple of other companies that really tarred the image of non-governmental pension companies. I'd like you to comment on that. And I would like to probably give the floor to Pavel Yankovsky as a market representative, market participant, who will also speak about financial sector reform. I'd like to take the liberty and say a couple of words from a market representative, as I'm dealing immediately with accumulative incremental pension retirement benefits schemes. For 8 years, this child created by the state and which the state gave to its citizens, it has been living and evolving against all odds. I think we owe this to, first of all, very nice piece of legislation that we had about non-governmental pension and retirement schemes. We copied it from relevant Western, US piece of legislation. And this law has practically never changed because it was done nicely, and secondly because of probable lack of real intention to do it. And we've heard about the importance of social processes behind scrambling money for retirement benefits, and the diagrams we saw, they show really abysmal situation with retirement benefits making an aggregate of 1/2 of the national budget at this moment. And this is a very huge argument for going into private. There are 600,000 people registered as active retirement benefit schemes participants. That is people who have transferred some of the amount for their retirement accounts. Unlike international practices where the third level is entirely an additional safety net extra to the existing retirement benefit provided by the national pension system. In the case of Ukraine, our third level could well perform a very important function that the state better notices. It would provide possibilities of getting rid of unofficial salaries, gray salaries, by making people use the extra money for their official retirement protection. There are many private entrepreneurs who are about to reach their retirement age, and there will be an army of really hungry people trying to live to their minimum benefits and with no guarantees of them having some amount stashed at home. And I have been monitoring their official position since 2012. We tried to contact the government also through the RPR channels, but without much success. And this brings up a lot of issues and problems. And if we speak about the draft legislation we are discussing today, this piece is rather simple one because it eliminates discrimination and it really structures and simplifies the very process. The market stands definitely in for this law because until that moment all initiatives related to private retirement schemes and improvements to the system were being done or pursued against state reactions and all odds. I cannot underscore it even more. The need to get rid of blind spots in the scheme, and the third level will definitely create prerequisites for second level establishment in our country. It is much less popular in Ukraine, but it is as important as it is unpopular here. Probably because of that, government officials are very careful in tackling the topic, but given the 11-year term that we are beating around the bush here, it is about time, to somehow move ahead. And we need to see how to deal with the situation when we are living borrowed lives. The amounts we pay from our salaries and other income, they are used to pay for the elderly people today. And without having this problem resolved, we risk having the mounting problem. It also connects to the demographics, that Ukraine here follows the whole European trend of aging population. And the problem gets only worse. According to IMF forecasts, by 2025, our budget expenditures will be at par with our pension fund expenditures. I would still like to see this piece of legislation as a tiny component leading to certain much wanted and needed changes and related to introduction of the second level. And I hope that relevant parliamentary committees and the parliament itself will thoroughly review this draft legislation. There are also examples when retirement schemes, even of the third level, are being done with involvement of the state. We have a retirement scheme with the National Bank of Ukraine, or we can take the Arkada Bank. I would not even comment on that because wherever the state goes, there is corruption there, and many commercial companies are simply not in a position to allow themselves the luxury of going into this market. Though in practical terms, I cannot remember a single commercial pension fund that would go bankrupt and insolvent. The worst case scenario, such pension funds would transfer their assets to other asset managing companies, and that was it. The beauty of the accumulative system that we have, given the indexation of savings and pension funds. It is done automatically through revalorization of assets, going along the solidarity line. The government would have need to motion its indexation efforts to the parliament and sell some currency or some other viable assets to compensate. In private schemes, it is done automatically, and say on the third level, after the national currency drop in 2014, it was done automatically to increase the amount 1.8 times through re-evaluation of related currency assets, and that did not need any government moves, any parliamentary hearings, any resolutions being made. And I think this is just one of examples to show how efficient the system can be.
Well, Pavel, do you mean that we have one of the best laws on private pension provisions? Does it allow bankruptcy of the private pension funds? The pension funds private pension funds cannot go bankrupt. They should be restructured, etc. The private pension funds has the only limited participants, and the procedure of supervision is very strict, but our law is of good quality, and the quality of this law is proved by the 11 years history. Without interference of the state, the private pension funds can be successful, and they are all successful in Ukraine. So the administering company of the pension fund, the pension fund, private pension fund, it's more or less of image nature. Whether people are able to choose the investment strategy. People can choose between pension funds, but they cannot choose the investment strategy. Some group of the pension fund participants can delegate their representative to the board and choose the investment policy. But actually, the pension funds are usually very conservative investors, and they are a long-term or at least middle-term instruments, and the government actually do not assess the advantages of redistribution of the pension resources. Actually, even that law which we want to pass today, they will allow to bring investments from the people who are 40 years old today. The money which have passed via pension funds, these are some personalized money which belong to some private people. The managers of pension funds can use them. Whether you can use the pension money unless you have not reached the pension age. There are some conditions when you can quit the pension fund having reached the pension age. I think that pension accumulations are important for those people who would like to use their pension savings. If pensioners have sufficient savings and, for example, they face heart disease, and in line with legislation, in case of serious diagnosis and you need more so you can be compensated for some treatment, medical treatment from pension fund. Also, it is possible to use pension savings for housing, for university education. In any case, you are able to resolve many social solutions or solutions to social issues independently of the number of pensioners. When you have personal pension savings, it does not matter how many pensioners you have in the country. Well, okay, let us assume that sometime later our pension fund will tell us that 1.5 salary. Actually, I think people should understand that when people go into pension, should think how to substitute another half of the salary when living in the pension. And we also should realize that in the best case that those who reach 70 years of age, they receive 30% of their salaries. We should think how the state fund, that part of our pension should be paid by the state pension fund, and some should be accumulated by us personally. You mentioned basic things when which European people receive. What percentage of your last salary would you like to get? I would like to have the higher pension as possible, while the coefficient 2 and 3 is possible because the pension fund money are spent today, and some 30 years later, all of us will dependent on the then army of people, and you will stay dependent on the bureaucrats. If today you do not receive pension, then the probability of getting pension in the future is approaching to zero, and the probability that we will receive something in future from the government is going to zero. So coming back to our draft law, This is a big step in creating and in campaigning for the accumulating pension level, third level pension system. People are not very eager to participate in private pension funds. Since it is not very profitable for pension funds to act in the market, and without incentives, it wasn't possible for them. I mentioned that 36% of our pension fund are spent for pensioners. If we are able to put 36% of our wages into pension savings, we would be very rich. The biggest problem is with the transition period. Each member of parliament, each minister, they understand that the biggest problem is in transition period. Everybody understands that to launch the pension savings system, we have to redistribute limited resources. But to launch this system, we should either decrease considerably pension age or to increase considerably the taxes. That is, RPR has made suggestions to the tax code which would allow us to become richer on the account of savings and redistribute that taxes, mandatory single social tax and taxes which we pay to the state, individual taxes, they might be used by us for savings, and I think that everything might believe on us. The draft law will be presented soon, and we have to find the branch of power with the legislative initiative who is ready to introduce this law to the parliament. Also, our financial market has to be sanitized. The draft law takes into account the necessities of our financial system. It also creates incentives for people to make savings, and unfortunately, as of today, we do not see those branches of power able to support it. Unfortunately, all people in power try to use the pension topic during elections. They wish to redistribute our taxes, and they populistically promise to redistribute our taxes, while today we suggest to them to review the draft law, which is for the advantage of real people, whether they will agree to come to this discussion.
It's hard to comprehend for me how government officials will think and act if invited to such discussion, but what we are suggesting now, I mean the draft bill that you have distributed, we want to offer the low cost at which great support can be mustered for people to resolve their own problems without involvement of the state, still more than the state is clearly unable to do this part. And the cost of resources necessary to replace this state's incapability is really negligible. It will be really low price that will need to be paid to let people resolve their problems without any involvement of the state or burden for the state. Not sure if they hear it or if they will, but the model of budget costs involved can be very assuredly in favor of this scheme. And we have a question from the audience. Vyacheslav Redko, thank you for the discussion. It has been clearly interesting, and I think the lack of government officials here is a clear sign how incapable the government is in this matter. Could you tell me a bit, life insurance, is it an element of the third level of retirement benefit scheme, and do you have a representative in your group knowledgeable of the matter to deal with it? And the second question, could we please limit just for one question, and you will have a chance to put the second question in due time. No, we did not forget about life insurance companies. Life insurance companies, they do not participate in funds accumulation, but they do participate in the process of paying amounts. I think that the tax code includes types of agreements or contracts to be signed with respective financial institutions, and there are both contracts with non-governmental pension schemes, but also an aggregate pension accumulation scheme, which is about a voluntary life insurance, retirement insurance product. Given the colleagues already mentioned, it would be subject to benefits. There will be benefits to two financial instruments, the one on additional retirement benefit and the one on payment. All the instruments implemented in the non-governmental retirement benefit schemes, they are all included and they work under equal conditions. And the accumulation phase, on the third level, it will be about non-governmental retirement funds, and life companies will participate in payments themselves as an annuity. But I can argue easily if you give me exact language from the bill that bothers you. Well, I worked in a life insurance company myself time ago, and from my experience I can tell you that there are professionals in that area. Pavel, you mentioned, and Vyacheslav mentioned that the state has no resources to redistribute them to your institutions. I can assure you there is plenty of resources in shadows in the black market, on the black market. And you also mentioned tax benefits. Maybe we should, rather than keep thinking of tax benefits, rather create conditions the way they offer it as bank deposits, when an individual will have certain privileged terms and conditions when the time to pay the amount comes, with some sort of interest rate offered and with zero interest rate imposed during some first initial period. Maybe you could carry out an analytical work among your group members to know how many of them actually have similar instruments. Anybody is willing to comment? Any more questions from the audience? Is it that you want to summarize? Well, actually, I already summarized a bit, speaking about the replacement coefficient. I would speak very openly here. I think the government is not interested in us ceasing being slaves. That's simple. And it is very proper for every one of us to have something very personal, whatever government protection, whatever public protection or safety net. A person may not feel entirely safe by having to rely just on the government, and given the existing system, it hardly gives any reason for better trust. And yes, we will have to depend on our children and grandchildren. But at the moment, we need to state it frankly that the whole burden of paying retirement benefits we've shifted to the working population and the young people. When they introduced the third level of retirement benefit scheme in Poland, they said that those who were in retirement benefits that time, had to really understand and reduce their spending, because in reality we may not entirely count that our retirees will have decent benefits in due time. But there is also a factor which is of subjective nature, as latest events and developments in our country show, and as the physics shows. I mean, the consciousness factor, the subjectivity factor in economic growth is of importance. Time ago, I was on business trip to Northern Europe to see very nicely developed third and second level of retirement schemes there, and our delegation asked the Swedes about how they managed to do this pension reform. We explained that our MPs say it is not necessary and produce all sorts of horror stories to the population about the dangers of that reform. And we know of a number of components of this aggregate amount component that we used. Unfortunately, we do have that country in Europe, with Ukraine having this 2 billion hryvnias of accumulated share in the contribution. Well, Swedes said that it is about trust between citizens and the government, the state, and this trust should be mutual one. One's been sure of state support, and the latter been sure that citizens will never try to fiddle with the state, and publication will definitely understand that it will overheat the economy by reserving money rather than investing it elsewhere. So the question is about mutual trust to be built up here in Ukraine, and this is what financial sector reform task force works on, and this is what insurance companies and pension funds are both thinking about. You see, it probably starts with individuals starting to do their savings, irrespective of the horrors he or she thinks. Because normally people would think that I will try to do it because I need to, and if I lose them, I will continue, I will start again. I, for myself, have been doing it from time to time by buying some petty gold jewelry, like earrings, to feel myself at least a bit independent from the state, or those children or grandchildren that may have to feel the burden of my financial incompetence. I do not want to be a burden for my children. I think neither of you does. Maybe this is another method for us to build better trust in the third and second level of retirement benefits. But again, it remains to be seen how the government will react to our draft legislation. The lack of support, the absence of voting will surely tell us that politicians are against. But maybe at time there will be a Ukrainian Adam Smith to tell about the riches of the Ukrainian nation and how this should be increased. Thank you. I think that we've had a lot of roundtable discussions on similar topics here in this Media Center of Reforms. And many times we saw government officials ignore our event. But anyway, the way of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. And we should never give up. Without that, we wouldn't have this center. We wouldn't see those changes that the whole country witnessed. So let's hope for success and for the future, and let us live up to the moment when your initiative will be implemented. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Our work for today is over.